Making our way through the Saturday card for Churchill Downs, May the 4th. That is Kentucky Derby Day, and the past performances are now available at drf.com. You can purchase Kentucky Derby packages, and one gentleman who's going to be joining me to talk about the Distaff Turf Mile, which is race 7 on Saturday. He knows all about those all-access DRF packages where you can get the Timeform US past performances. David Aragona joins me from Timeform US, does work with DRF, NYRA. David, I was joking with you. I am doing work with DRF of social media, some different things here and there. So I'm on some of the email chains, and I see you on basically every email chain as far as recording, podcast, pacecast, putting in selections, making morning line odds, written analysis, betting strategies coming up soon. You have your hands in just about everything. You always do a great job, but we know that you love what you do.
Yeah, it's a busy week, but it's the kind of week that you kind of love to do this sort of work because everyone gets so excited for Kentucky Derby week. The cards are fantastic at Churchill Downs on Friday and Saturday. As you were kind of alluding to, I'll be writing up all of those races with our colleague Marcus Hirsch in those DRF betting strategies, which is part of those packages that you can check out on Daily Racing Form website at drf.com. So a lot of work, but also a lot of really fun racing happening over the Friday and Saturday of this week.
So we will talk about the 7th race, the Distaff Turf Mile. We'll get some quick thoughts from David on the Oaks and the Derby, and then we can talk about other stuff that you can find of David's work this week, where there's going to be a lot of stuff leading in. We could basically do a full podcast on just the content that you have coming out probably in the next 5 days, David, right?
Let's not think about it too much.
Okay, let's think about this race and see if we can direct the folks to a winner or two. So if you're following along, this is race number 7 on the Saturday undercard on Derby Day. It's a grade 2, the Churchill Distaff Mile. What makes this race a little bit challenging when we're handicapping it, 4 or 5 days out as we are on Monday afternoon, is that there are a couple horses cross-entered in here that would, at the very least have an impact on the pace of this race. Like the one AG Bullet, who is entered in a race on Friday, also on Saturday. AG Bullet, we'd figure, would at the very least be involved in the early pace, stretching out from some sprint races and being in the mix there. And we also have Heavenly Sunday, who we could say the very same for, another horse who has good early speed. So those two horses have a real impact on this race, at least from how it shapes up, if they're in or not.
Yeah, it's really interesting to have those two be somewhat uncertain as to their participation, given that they do feel like two of the fastest fillies and mares in this field, and probably the greatest possible beneficiary if they both withdraw would be the number 9, Not So Close, who loves to have her own way on the front end. We'll see how that all plays out. I don't want to get too caught up in pace situations and trips just yet, given those variables.
Exactly.
But I think it's something you have to keep in the back of your mind, especially for that horse, Not So Close, as well as a deep closer like the number 3 Chili Flag, who has been the recipient of some fast paces in recent starts. I think you want to be aware if speed does come out, maybe that downgrades her a little bit.
And the morning line odds, which actually a little bit of a tangent. I saw someone post on social media the other day that David Aragona should just be like the nationwide odds maker. I'm not sure if you want to take that mantle up, but I think that was a compliment, saying that they think you do a very good job there. This was a race that was probably a tough one to do the morning line odds for, because we don't really have any overwhelming favorites in here. I think you're getting like a 4-1-ish sort of lukewarm favorite.
Yeah, I have a feeling the quality of the work might suffer a little bit if I was doing
right,
even 2 tracks, multiple
Monday,
tracks.
Tuesday,
I can't even fathom.
Harness, maybe some quarter horses in the mix too, all breeds, maybe whatever you're able to do.
Yeah, I tried some harness morning lines just as practice one time. Didn't go too well, but that's another story. I kind of have an inkling that the number 11, the other Chad Brown Coppice, is probably going to wind up the favorite in this race, just because she's got some really classy European running lines in her form. And when you start to go through and take it apart and watch some of her races, you could see real excuses in a few of her poor results. I mean, what chance did she have in her last start over in England when she finished behind Inspiral, who might be the most talented, or at least last year was the most talented female turf horse maybe anywhere in the world? result. And, she actually finished pretty well in that Sun Chariot to get up for fourth right on the wire. And prior to that, she had won some nice listed stakes races, both at Royal Ascot and then in the fall at Newmarket. And her two races in between that, where it looks like she didn't run well and maybe some might lead some people to believe that she's inconsistent based on that. I mean, it lists the turf course as good in the Falmouth Stakes. Watching that replay, it looked like it was much worse than good. They were kicking up clods, covered in rain. So, I mean, I don't think maybe that was a course she just didn't handle. And then watching back that Atalanta Stakes, her saddle slipped. I mean, it was akin to California Chrome in the Dubai World Cup, but it looked like the jockey was just about to slide off her rump. That's how bad the
balance was incredible. Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, not a full effort put forth that day, understandably. And it just seems like she's coming into Chad Brown's barn now. She's got class. He's picked out a spot that he's debuted some good European imports in the past. The post isn't ideal, but Frankie Dettori, he's got plenty of familiarity with her. He rode her to victory twice over in Europe. So she kind of feels like the horse to beat.
Yeah, and he was aboard in Spiral last time out when she beat her. So he definitely knows her and how she stacks up very, very well. I think we had to start with her too, because when you're looking at the rest of this group, it does really feel like a group of horses that are on the like grade 3 to maybe grade 2 stakes. And they're competitive with this group. But I think if you were to get a top tier effort from a horse like this, making their first US start, that probably would be a bit above what we've seen consistently from a lot of these horses. You pointed out one like Chili Flag, who will take a good amount of support, and one that's in really nice recent form. From a gambling standpoint, what I thought was just kind of interesting, from Chili Flag's perspective, she was actually right there on the wire with Walkathon, who's going to be inside of her. Walkathon has a little versatility to her. She was in a race last time out at Keeneland when we just had a lone speed situation. The horse got up front, went wire to wire as a big 25-1 long shot. And if you just sort of look at some of the horses that she's faced some pretty nice quality too. Similar horses from Chili Flag. You might be able to get a much better price on a horse like Walkathon, who wasn't beaten a whole lot by a Chili Flag. A lot of times as a gambler, I'm looking for situations like that where could you get 2.5 to 3 times the price on a horse like Walkathon as you might on a horse like Chili Flag, because with Brown and Ortiz, they're probably going to get just a little overbet based on those strong connections.
Yeah, we're thinking along the same lines here. I mean, if you watch back that Honey Fox, Walkathon actually provided the cover for Chili Flag to make that run into the race. And when you're a turf horse that's coming from as far back as Chili Flag does, you want to have that cover for as long as possible, especially in a fast-paced race before unleashing that late kick. And Walkathon sort of got there, and in mid-stretch, it looked like Chili Flag might actually draw away and win that race by a length. And I thought it was to Walkathon's credit that she battled back as much as she did to keep it to a neck margin at the wire. And then next time out, Walkathon just really didn't have much chance to close in the Jenny Wiley. Nobody had a chance to make up ground in that race. It was a slow-paced affair, just a total merry-go-round. She did benefit a little bit from being inside. I think that was a race where if you were outside of the 2-path, you really had no chance in that Jenny Wiley. But she still beat half the field, and there were some really good horses behind her in that spot. And just seems like she was a horse that was so good as a 3-year-old. Obviously, something went badly wrong for her to be off for as long as she was, and took her a while to come back to herself when she returned from that layoff in 2023. But it seems like Ian Wilkes now has her back in top form, and she's got that versatility, like you said, and she's got a rider on her back who loves to save ground. So I think this is the perfect post.
Proven at the Churchill Downs turf course. She's also a horse who, you play that common rival game too. The horse who beat her last time out, you also see defeated Chili Flag earlier last year, about a year ago. You see Didia also was a horse who got Chili Flag, and Walkathon was involved with Didia, not far behind Didia last time out. So lots of little things, and could offer you just a little bit more value with a horse like Walkathon, who could adapt to maybe different pace scenarios a little better than Chili Flag there, as definitely a question I wanted to ask you about. And then another horse who I think, just again, because of connections, because people will look up and see that this is a horse who's 3 for 4, has been pretty much close throughout. She hasn't been overwhelming on the speed figures, though, Delahaye, and she comes in off of a recent race from Fairgrounds. This is definitely a better group here, so she will have to step up a little bit, but positive things, third start off the form cycle, so she could be set for a good effort. She'll, need to take a little step forward here and probably be in the mix throughout.
Yeah, I mean, she's a horse that I think I'd want to get a decent price on, and we'll see what odds she ultimately goes off at. As you said, popular connections with her, but she is moving it forward at the right time. She's gotten very good trips in her races, but she's got that tactical speed and rateability that just lends itself to getting good trips. We'll see if the speed stays in this race. If maybe she has to rate a little further back in the early stages than she's accustomed to, because she probably is only like the fifth or sixth fastest horse in this race, so she hasn't really had that experience coming from as far back as that. But the Tom Benson that she comes out of, I mean, if you pull up the chart in Formulator, got a couple horses that ran back out of that race that were also Rans that since won with improved speed figures. A girl named Charlie, as well as Spirit and Glory, who came back to win with a much faster number at Aqueduct in a stakes race next time out. So maybe that was a slightly stronger race than it appeared. And she seems like one that you could consider.
Absolutely. A couple more questions to ask David Aragona as we go through race number 7 on the Saturday undercard at Churchill Downs. The number 5 horse, Cairo Consort, was a horse who was very good at 2 and was really good early on at 3 last year, and then didn't really seem like she kind of progressed and took steps forward. And this year, it's kind of funny when you look at her running lines, because she's sort of run similar races on speed figures, but it just looks like you can see when she faces horses that were a little too tough, and then she got down a little bit lesser and then a little bit lesser foes, and those same races just went a lot farther against that group. Is that what it's been for Cairo Consort, just kind of finding the right spot? Do you think that maybe woke her back up? She's shown ability and kind of been able to win in different ways. She's been an interesting horse over the last couple of years.
Yeah, as you're kind of getting at, I think she has a ceiling to her. I'm not sure that she is quite as talented as some others in here. And when she stepped up against that tougher company in races like the Edgewood last year, or more recently in the Pegasus World Cup Filly and Mare Turf, she just wasn't quite good enough. And the Sand Springs that she won last time, it was on the weaker side in terms of listed stakes races. There was a big favorite in their market segmentation who just did not show up, did not come back as the same horse. And once you sort of removed her from the race, it was basically a glorified allowance race. So I think this is going to be a tough spot for Cairo Consort. But speaking of horses that raced in that Pegasus World Cup Filly and Mare Turf, I want to discuss the number 12, Mission of Joy.
That's where we are going next. Absolutely.
I don't like the post position. I think that's a really tough draw, especially going the mile. John Velasquez, I mean, he's an excellent rider. I think saving ground in these types of races is sometimes something he doesn't make as much of a priority as other jockeys. So I wonder if she's going to be relegated to that 3 to 4 wide trip. And that was kind of the problem last time in the Pegasus World Cup, where she got another wide draw. And I thought actually ran on pretty well to be 5th. I mean, in my opinion, she hit the wire with Chili Flag. And I thought that there was no doubt she ran the better race than Chili Flag, who was just sort of picking up pieces after getting a pretty good ride. Mission of Joy's got real talent, and I think we've seen it in her last couple of starts. I just would have had an easier time picking her on top if she was drawn in post 4.
Completely agree. And one thing that I have a tough time nowadays when I'm looking at a filly like her, and it looks like they come back and they get things started and she's got a couple works. And then it seems like there's a little gap from March 27th to April 17th, which might be like a work or two. And sometimes that's a difficult thing as a handicapper, because I'm not sure if that was something. A lot of times there's not information really out there for to be found if the work was just missed, or was there a horse that got sick, or was there some sort of a weather issue, whatever it was. It's something I always try to notice if there is more than just one or more than just a week or two missed. Is that something you take into account or look at that bothers you? Or is it something that you see a couple more come back and you figure that they're probably ready to rock and roll now?
I think it's definitely worth noticing that stuff. I mean, in this day and age, trainers like to have these work patterns as consistent as possible. So when you see a gap like that, it's something that you do want to take note of. There probably was some issue. I bet they would have loved to have her in a race like the Grade 1 Jenny Wiley. You don't get that many Grade 1s in this division that are winnable. So obviously she missed that race. I don't know if that was ever a target, but it would have made sense. And they wind up here. Unfortunately, no luck at the post position draw out in post 12. But based on just pure quality, she's among the most talented horses in here.
Yeah, and it sounds like, the way that I was looking at this race from a gambling standpoint, I thought, two of the better value plays in here, if they can hold up close to their morning line, would probably be the 2 and the 12, who we were hitting on a little bit with Walkathon, who's 10-1 on the morning line, and I think just has some versatility there. And with both the horses that, the 2 and the 12 to the outside, why I like playing horses like this as a gambler is, their ceiling is high, and they're good enough with the right type of circumstances, and their form gets a little bit muddied up because there are some trips that were less than beneficial, or maybe facing a little bit too tough of foes. When that happens, that's good for us as gamblers, because that just builds the price on them. So, a horse that has a bunch of ones and has, really, really obvious form, you're not going to be able to get great prices on them. Sometimes it's the horses like this that you can get, a better value swing at your swing or roll of the dice. So Walkathon for me would be one where, 6 and above, like really hoping for something like 8 and above. I think she would be a really nice, value play in here.
100%. I think you summed that up well. I mean, you can acknowledge that a horse like Chili Flag is probably a little more likely to win than Walkathon, but she's going to be at maybe a third of the price. Maybe she's 3-1 and Walkathon is 9-1. And in that situation, let's say that we believe Chili Flag is 16% to win the race and Walkathon is 15%, or 20% and 15%. Walkathon's the better bet at the price that she's going to be, because at the end of the day, you're trying to make money, and that's where the value is. Value is a term that sort of gets thrown around willy-nilly without really thinking about it, but that's value when you think Walkathon is 15% to win the race and she's 9-1.
David, we'll hear more from you, analysis, wagering strategies just like this when you tackle the Friday and Saturday cards. Now, we talked about a race on Saturday. Let's jump in the DeLorean for a minute and go back in time to Friday and take a look at the Kentucky Oaks. The field has been drawn, field of 14, and what a challenging race just to make a morning line for in this one, huh? You have Tarifa, who is 7-2, and this is just a really cool renewal of the Oaks, because it does feel like the way a race like this was supposed to be and designed. You get the best horses from all these different circuits all around, and who have won prep races and who are all really solid and in good form right now, and they all get to show up. It seems like, knock on wood, they're all heading into this race like healthy, training well, going into it well, and we have a good group of 14 lining up here.
Yeah, it's an interesting group of horses, and you could kind of, at least for me, I kind of split this field in half. I think there are 7 horses that you could talk about that have a real big chance, and then 7 that I view as sort of tougher to make. And the odds don't necessarily divide them up that way. That's just kind of the way I'm thinking about them. I will say I'm happy I don't have to make a morning line for this race. I'm not exactly sure who's going to go favored. And I know for races like this, sometimes the line maker does not get to adjust after the post position draw. And this feels like one where post positions could dictate how some of the betting goes.
Yeah, so Tarifa's the slight morning line favorite. Then you have a next tier right behind them. And a lot of these fillies haven't done much wrong. Like, it's just kind of like you said, it's sort of pick your poison. What kind of trips do you think they're going to get in here? Did some of them just fire their best race and maybe they don't come back with another really big effort? Can some of them round into their peak performance right here? A horse like Leslie's Rose, for example, she had a couple really nice races early on, probably a little disappointing at Gulfstream Park when she was heavily favored, and then comes over to Keeneland. And as gamblers, we kind of forget about her, and she goes off at a big price and she wins. You wonder, was that her big effort last time out, or does she have another one in there? And, she's just a really nice filly. A lot of intriguing ways to look at this race.
Yeah, I mean, Leslie's Rose done no favors by this outside draw, especially because she's a horse that got such a perfect trip last time, and
you
really wanted to have
inside,
her
right?
9-1. Yeah, just saved all that ground, and she was a crazy price. I mean, sometimes horses just get lost in races, and for whatever reason, the bettors just didn't go for her. It didn't make a whole lot of sense that she was 9-1, and her stablemate Candid was 8-5. I'll still never understand that one. But I mean, she ran really well. I guess the issue with her is just it's going to be hard to get as good of a trip as last time, and she's probably going to be a shorter price than she was last time. I don't know if she'll be half the price now that she's drawn so wide, but still, I think it's going to be a tough go for her, and it just feels like maybe she's not going to be the right value horse in this race.
And anyone jump out to you a few days out? We're still Monday, so you have plenty of time. We're not going to necessarily hold you to it and come in and scream at you. But who are some of the horses that you're kind of looking at maybe on your radar to use in a pick 4 or pick 5 situation?
I did set picks for this race already, so I've done some
nice.
thinking about it.
Nice.
So I found this race to be very confusing to handicap and really unsure if there was a clear-cut most likely winner, or even pegging 2 or 3 horses as being the most likely winners. And where I kind of landed is that there are about 7 horses that I say really have a chance to win, and they're all somewhere in that like 12, 13, 14% to win the race. And I don't think any one of them is so much more likely to win than the others, especially given the way some of these post positions played out. So I kind of wanted to veer away from the horses that I think are going to get bet in this race. Horses like Torpedo Anna and Tarifa, who I respect, and I think they can win this race, but just given that they drew the good post positions, I could see them going off as the first and second choices. Ways and Means, I have a lot of respect for her. She's a horse that did not get the right trip last time. I'm sure we'll talk about that a little bit, but she's one that I feel like is going to attract a lot of support because there were so many angles pointing to her. So I kind of wanted to find and seek out those horses that are not going to take that money. And for me, there are 2 of those that fit the bill. They're the number 12, Power Squeeze, who maybe did not run as well as Ways and Means last time, but I think there are some things to like about her. And the number 3, Where's My Ring, who's the one that I'm really interested in because she drew a great post. She's really not getting the respect that she maybe deserves. I don't know if she's going to be the 15-1 that she is on the line, but I still don't think she's going to be vying for favoritism in this race or anything close to it. And, I mean, she's coming into this race running speed figures that are every bit as fast as everybody else. She faced some good competition out in California, held her own, and she's one where you really don't have any question about her getting the 9 furlong distance, whereas I think that's still a question mark for some others in here.
And, that's a really great point, because what I like about doing something like what you were saying with Where's My Ring, you can take a 3 race sample size if you're someone who's using the Beyer speed figures that we were looking at here at in the past performances. And her last 3, and they came at different tracks too, which I like. So it wasn't like all over at Santa Anita. She shipped over and ran well at Aqueduct. They stack up with anyone in the race. Like maybe only Tarifa slightly better. They're that consistent. So it wasn't even like a situation where, she just chased Copian in one fast race. And so, yeah, she got probably a little overinflated speed figure just chasing a really fast horse. She showed that she has this ability multiple times, multiple different tracks, multiple different pace scenarios, and she's just getting better. But based on connection, she will really be under the radar. Like, I think she's a must use in exotics. And the 2 that, when you were describing how you looked at the race, I immediately was thinking 3 and 12 were the 2 that fit that profile, because they just feel like they're not so much a cut below the others that the price reflected. It's just like what we were talking about with the Walkathon versus Chili Flag situation, where you just don't feel like these horses are going to be 3 or 4 times less likely to win this race, and that's what their price might reflect.
Yeah, that's exactly how I'm thinking about it. Where's My Ring? I mean, her Gazelle was really good. I know that there wasn't a whole lot behind her, and I think there are some questions about the quality of a few preps that these horses won, but I don't care what was behind her when she had those gaps of 4 lengths and 5 lengths. She's beating Jinjin by nearly 10 lengths at the end of that race. That's how she's supposed to beat a horse of Jinjin's quality. So I think the speed figure holds up. I mean, the final time was almost exactly the same as the Wood Memorial. I know some people are considering resilience in the Kentucky Derby. So we know Where's My Ring has quality. She's supposed to get nearly the exact same trip as last time. And I agree with everything you said about her form leading up to that. I mean, she had faced good horses, got seasoning experience, and she's just not going to be that kind of price because of the connections. And it's an interesting discussion with Power Squeeze and Ways and Means, because conventional handicapping wisdom when you're trying to be clever is that you want to bet the trip horse, and Ways and Means is the trip horse. I mean, her journey in the Gulfstream Park Oaks was just kind of a disaster coming off the layoff. I mean, slammed at the start, further back than they wanted her, in tight, taking kickback. He got her to the outside, but they ended up making this premature move way too early, struck the front before they wanted to, and she got run down. So Ways and Means ran the best race in the Gulfstream Park Oaks. I think that's cut and dry. But everybody saw it. It's not like it's some hidden bad trip. So it's built into the price now. And I think you have to view Ways and Means as, a horse tackling a 9 furlong race now, second off the layoff, and not just the trip horse, because I think she's going to take money based on that trip.
Yep.
And is she really a 1.125 horse? I don't know. I think she's brilliantly talented. I just wonder if she's as well suited to this task as some others in here. And she's drawn a wide post. I'm not sure that she's going to get a great trip once again. And power squeeze, she didn't run as well as Ways and Means last time, but did she run so much worse than her that she deserves to be 2 or 3 times the price? I don't think she does. And she's just so consistent. She shows up. She clearly gets added distance. She's got plenty of experience going around 2 turns. She's got a couple of fast speed figures, and she's not going out for connections that are going to attract as much support. So, especially in a race where I think there's going to be some pace, she's definitely one that I found myself upgrading.
If you're looking for underdogs in any line of sports, we see this all the time when there are little bits of intangibles where athletes find a way to win, and that's an intangible I always want. Especially when it's built into a price. With this, there's a reason why this horse usually has decent trips, because they're able to put themselves in a nice spot to get that good trip. And now, again, these are horses that are just going to be forgotten a little bit about, because Ways and Means is a lot more of a sexy horse. We saw the monster work. I don't know how great that's going to help this horse back. I know the connections weren't happy about going that fast a week out, but very, very talented. I mean, this was the buzz horse last year, David, right after the debut. This was the horse like on the East Coast, and kind of Tamara was the one on the West Coast that we all thought were the 2 big ones. And she had trouble in both of her starts that she's lost. She's had legitimate trouble. And that also brings up another thing where it hasn't been her fault. And for 2 races, we can look at 2 different situations and say, oh, very unlucky. When it starts to happen, maybe 3 or 4 or 5 times, you wonder, there are horses that sometimes draw themselves to traffic just the opposite way that a horse like Power Squeeze kind of finds their way out of it and into the winner's circle.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, the fact of the matter is she didn't break that sharply in either the Spinaway or the Gulfstream Park Oaks, and it sort of put her in that position where she possibly could get into trouble. It doesn't guarantee that you're going to get into trouble when you break a half wing slowly, but it's certainly something that you don't want to have happen just in case horses start swerving around you, and that's always a possibility in a race like the Kentucky Oaks with a large field. Personally, I'm not concerned about the workout. She's just a fast horse. You might recall, I think she worked 45 and change before her debut at Saratoga, so I mean, she can work fast and run well. It's just a question for me of the trip and whether she's ideally suited to the distance.
There's a few thoughts on the Kentucky Oaks. Let's take a look at the Derby. David, 5-6 days out now, field of 20 has been drawn. And from a betting perspective, there is a top 2 tier, only 3 horses under 10-1 here, with Fierceness at 5-2, Sierra Leone at 3-1, and 2 horses who will both take a good amount of money, but couldn't be really farther apart as far as running styles and where they might be in the race on Saturday.
Yeah, they really are polar opposites just in every single way. Running styles, reliability. I mean, Sierra Leone just seems to show up with that top performance every single time, steadily moving forward, whereas Fierceness has been like a yo-yo, up and down. But when he's good, he is really good. And, I don't argue with anybody who says that the good version of Fierceness is going to crush this field. I believe it. But I think there are some real concerns about Fierceness showing up with his top effort in the Kentucky Derby, not just because he's inconsistent. I think there are other reasons in his form to be a little skeptical of him. And Sierra Leone, I mean, he's among the shorter prices, and he's just got to work out that trip from so far back. So I think there are ways that you can poke holes in both of these favorites. I do want to mention, though, I don't think that both of these horses are going to be 3-1 or lower. That just doesn't happen in the Kentucky Derby. The race isn't bet that way. So many other horses end up taking a certain amount of money. You typically see a lot of horses between 10 and 25-1. And, when a race is bet like that, it's just not possible for 2 horses to be 3-1 or less. So I think you're going to see a little more separation, and maybe Sierra Leone in particular drifts up a little bit. So if you like Sierra Leone, I think you could get, $10 as the payout. But I still think you want to have a few concerns about a horse that has to navigate a lot of traffic in a 20-horse field.
So from a gambling standpoint, looking at the race, who are some of the horses that are going to be on your radar making their way onto some of your tickets?
Well, I kind of was able to narrow it down to 3 horses that I was considering for a pick in this race that I was sort of going back and forth on. 2 of them are horses that are coming out of that Louisiana Derby route, because it really does feel like that's where some of the most competitive prep races took place. I'm not saying anything too clever there. I think that's the general consensus, but I also think it's true. I mean, that Risen Star was just a super tough race. You've got 5 horses coming out of that race that are back in the Kentucky Derby. And, as for catching Catching Freedom and Honor Marie, the two that I'm referring to, I mean, finishing first and second in the Louisiana Derby. I mean, I liked what I saw from them in each of their races for different reasons. I mean, Catching Freedom is just that horse that continues improving with every start, and not just in terms of speed figures. He's been improving mentally at each start because he was kind of a mess early in his career. He was lugging in races. That's what got him beat in his second start at Churchill. I mean, he was a horse that really struggled with lead changes. He was just swapping back and forth between leads and a few of even his victories early on. But it just seems like he's gotten over those quirks with each start. And he was really professional last time out in the Louisiana Derby. He rated kindly. He's not one of these horses that drops way back and needs to be ridden.
That's what was reminded of the most when watching all of the replays back on him again the last few days, is that he's not just a stone cold closer. In some of those races, he's at the back of the leading packs where he's 3.5, 4+ lengths out. And it's just nice to know that that's a button you can push in a race like the Derby when you don't have to be 18th, 19th, 20th, and having to pass every single horse in the field.
And as a trip handicapper, one thing that you sort of get a sense of when you watch a lot of races and watch races like the Kentucky Derby is that you want horses that are handy, because those horses are going to be there for the jockey when they push the button. And sometimes the Kentucky Derby, you got to push the button when you don't expect you need, because the holes open up and they close very quickly in the Kentucky Derby. So you want the horse to be there for you. You don't want to have to start riding the horse and then have him respond 5 or 10 strides later. I think that was the problem with maybe a horse like Mo Donegal, who got a very similar trip to Rich Strike in that Derby a couple of years ago. But Mo Donegal was a horse who would need maybe 10 strides of encouragement to pick up his stride, whereas Rich Strike was just in the bridle every step of the way in that race. Maybe he wasn't always that kind of horse, but on that day, he was always there for Sonny Leone. And, Catching Freedom just feels like that kind of horse that is going to race in the bridle and be there for you. So I think he's a horse that's really well suited to a race like the Kentucky Derby. And if you had to tell me, pick a horse that's going to be in the money, most likely, it's Catching Freedom. We'll see if he's good enough to win the race. Overall talent, I don't know exactly if he's at the top of the class, but he's a horse I definitely want to use. And as for Honor Marie, I kind of agree with the general narrative around this horse, which is not saying anything that clever. I mean, he's just a horse that really seems to be improving coming into this race. Obviously, the Risen Star, it didn't set up for him. No pace on, and he was even further back than Sierra Leone. And he did take that step forward last time in the Louisiana Derby. Didn't close as well as Catching Freedom, and I didn't think there was a huge difference between their trips. Watching it back, Honor Marie just didn't have that push button turn of foot that Catching Freedom unleashed in the stretch. But he still finished up the race well. He seems like this horse that is not going to have a problem with added distance. And having watched a lot of his workouts, even going all the way back to when he was coming off the layoff in the Risen Star, it's marked the difference between how he was working back in February compared to how he's working now. Maybe he's just a horse that really moves more fluidly over the Churchill down surface. I often don't put too much stock in that, but he just seems like a horse that's really thriving coming into this race. The problem is, everybody sees that. I mean, everybody who's really paying attention sees that. So I think he's going to be like 12, 14 to 1. I don't think he's going to be 20 to 1.
Yeah, I agree. He's going to take money, but again, you're saying like he just makes sense. When you look at his form overall too, the form last year was very good. Some proven races at Churchill. Then the layoff, he comes back in the Risen Star. We pointed out how strong that race was. 3 of the horses who finished in front of him came back to win a final Derby prep, and then he takes that nice big step forward in his second start, and he wasn't able to go with Catching Freedom, who has just a little more foundation right now. And then, as you pointed out, he's getting better from that point. Now he could just be taking a lot out of his races. He's hard to knock when you're building cases for a lot of horses like this. And yeah, he does just make a whole lot of sense. And as you pointed out, that Louisiana round has been very good for a lot of these horses. It's nice that they get a little foundation too with the 1 1/8 and the 1 3/16. It doesn't seem like a lot, but sometimes it's just a little bit extra that you have an advantage when a lot of these other horses don't. And anything in a race like this that could help you in a field of 20 where you could just get little tiny advantages, definitely something to keep note of with a horse that, fingers crossed, can we get 14, 15? I think 12 is probably right where you were saying on Honor Marie.
Yeah, it just feels like a kind of horse that's going to take money in this race, especially when you set that 20 to 1 morning line. It kind of ends up driving down the price a little bit more. Believe me, I know how that stuff works. Yep. So, we'll see how this race gets bet. I ended up picking those 2 second and third, and I put the number 11 Forever Young on top. And I get that some people might say that's just a cop-out pick because, I mean, you're kind of saying to yourself, I'm deciding between A, B, and C, and I'm just going to take option D, which is the one that you can't really compare the others to. And that's sort of what Forever Young is in this race. He's a little bit of a wild card. You don't exactly know how he's going to stack up against these from a quality standpoint. And I just kind of have to go back to gut feeling and instinct as a handicapper, watching as many trips and races as you do. And I just get the sense this horse is really good. And I'm hoping in terms of value that there's just going to be a little bit of fatigue with these UAE Derby horses because let's be honest, they've been a little disappointing in the Derby. I mean, we went through Mendelssohn, Thunder Snow, then Dermasodagake last year, and for different reasons, they all were just kind of disasters in the Kentucky Derby from what was expected. And I wonder if people who sort of were on that bandwagon maybe aren't as enamored with Forever Young. Perhaps I'm getting a little hopeful in that sense. I still think he's going to be vying for third choice in this race, probably a similar price to Catching Freedom. And for me, that's just fine because I have some knocks on the two favorites, which I briefly touched upon. And Forever Young, I just think he's got a set of attributes to him that makes him much better suited to this race than a couple of those horses that I mentioned in the past, like Mendelssohn, who was, that front-running UAE Derby winner who got just slammed at the start of the Kentucky Derby, just a calamity of errors at the start, or Dermasodagake, who again didn't get off to a great start in the Derby, but was probably a little bit enhanced by that racetrack in Dubai. Not to say he's a bad horse. I mean, I think he's subsequently shown he's really good, but maybe not ideally suited to the way that the Kentucky Derby was run that year. I just think Forever Young is way more adaptable.
I know.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, he seems like more versatile, more willing when you're just watching the trips. And what's funny, the note that I made in watching his races, the last two of them, the way where he's just sort of 3 wide, 4 wide, and comfortable there and content, that feels like a Kentucky Derby trip. The way that he had in both of his last 2 races where, you know what, let's just be a little bit wide. If we have to keep ourselves out of trouble, that's a better place to be than inside behind shuffling. Fine with just sitting outside of horses, just finding another gear late there, just a real determination late, obviously, to run down Bookham Dano. Like I did note that those feel like the kind of wide trips that you get in big fields that a lot of these other horses might not be used to.
Here's how I'd put it. He's like the opposite of fierceness because he's run right. 5 times, and his first, third, and fifth starts have been perfect trips, and he delivered as expected. His second and fourth starts, in that race at Mombetsu in Japan, and then 2 back in the Saudi Derby, he did not look comfortable early in those races. The Saudi Derby was run at a faster pace than he was comfortable running, and he had to be asked from a long way out. And unlike Fierceness, who might have thrown in the towel in that situation, Forever Young kept trying and still caught a really good horse in Bookham Dano in a race that, look, I'm not a speed figure maker. I'm not going to attempt to even ask reputable speed figure makers to make speed figures for that Saudi Derby. But I think anybody who did try to make a speed figure for that race would have it really, really high because that race came up super fast on that day. And, then you go all the way back. I'm really kind of digging deep here, but if you watch his second race at Mombetsu in Japan, he resented the kickback that day. And I think that's where the narrative is coming from his connections, that they're concerned about kickback. Because when you watch that race back, he basically ran the entire race with his head up in the air, just resenting what was coming back at him. And he still won the race. He still produced that kick. I mean, he is just this remarkable horse who just has a way of getting it done. Now, I will say, the kickback that he was experiencing that second start, I don't know where they got that dirt track from. It feels like they imported sand from a beach. That's what it looked like. I think it's a very different surface than what he's going to encounter at Churchill Downs on Derby Day. So I'm not that concerned, especially because he has handled kickback just fine in other races. So I kind of want to dispel that notion. I'm not considering it too much. For me, he gets distance. He's a strong finisher. And like I was saying with Catching Freedom, when he's comfortable in terms of the pace, he's got that handy style where he's going to come off the bridle later than other horses. And that's the kind of horse I want in the Derby.
David's going to be singing Forever Young if he crosses the wire first. We'll ask for an encore, David. It's always so exciting leading into these days where you have not only the Derby, not only the Oaks, but so many good races on the undercard. Hopefully we were able to help some of you, lead you to a winner in one of these races that we discussed. David, run through anything that you want to mention. I know you have so much coming up over the next week or so, but anything that you want to throw out there and let people know where they can find more of your work, because we always appreciate it so much, man. You do such a great job at everything. And I just, as someone who tries to pride myself in working always and doing really hard work, I just appreciate listening to you. And I'm always able to learn something that I just didn't find, or you found something that I might not have looked at. And I think that's why people like listening to shows like this and like listening to you. So you always are, you're hitting and you're checking the boxes, man, of what we look for you from. And thank you very much for helping so many people out.
Well, that means a lot coming from you, Gino, because I know you put a lot of heart and passion into everything that you do as well. So I definitely appreciate it. And as for some of the stuff that I've got going on this week, I mean, a lot of stuff being posted on the Daily Racing Form YouTube channel. If you're not subscribed to the Daily Racing Form YouTube channel, definitely do so this week, because we've got plenty of stakes previews, not just from me and Craig, who I do a lot of them with, but Dan and Mike Beer, Dan Illman and Mike Beer doing a ton of stakes previews that you could check out on there. We've got that Derby-thon happening. Starting at noon on Wednesday, 24 hours of unrepeated analysis and coverage. So definitely check that out. I think I'll be appearing in part of it, and
I'll be in the mix as well. Yeah,
you'll be in there as well. A slew of handicappers and analysts. So definitely be aware that is happening. Craig and I will have our typical Timeform US forecast. We're going to be recording that on, I think, Tuesday morning. So we'll do a deep dive into, I think, every one of the Derby contenders and maybe talk about some other topics as well. So all of that going on. And then some of those packages that are available on DRF.com. Like I said at the start, I'll be writing the betting strategies with Marcus Hirsch. What that is just we'll be writing up analysis for every race on Oaks Day and Derby Day with some recommended wagers. Marcus and I'll probably even team up to try to hit a pick 5 or 2 through the couple of days. So check that out if you're interested.
David, thank you so much, buddy. I know it's a busy week. We appreciate your time as always, and we'll be reading along. We'll be rooting for you. I hope you have a fantastic weekend with all of your wagers. And again, thanks so much for all you do for us horse players.
Thanks for having me on.
Folks, hope we were able to head you in the right direction on Saturday on the undercard. Plenty more to come. Big thanks to David for helping us out, but we will continue along through the Saturday Churchill Downs undercard.